Thank you, Geert, for also presenting us this broad landscape of alternatives, as you said, most of which is still mainly invisible in mainstream media, invisible to a more general public. Do you see it as what John Thackeray earlier called a movement? Is this something really gaining momentum and at a certain point in time emerging?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if movement is, it's a bit early days, but as we know from the web, how things can grow once they've been developed, once they've matured enough. We also know that, and this is what Silicon Valley entrepreneurs know all too well, and we can learn a lot from them, how it can scale up in a very, very short amount of time. And this is why I'm a bit skeptical to use the word movement, because movements often have another way of growing, emerging, and then turning into mass movements that manifest themselves on the streets.
Mm-hmm, sure. I was a bit astonished when you mentioned Ning.
Yep.
This is really interesting. When I looked at Ning, I thought, gee, I would love this to be something like Maxwell's project.
Me too. Me too. I'm also very surprised, that Ning still operates the way it does. Maybe just because it was a bit too early. Ning has been around for what, 3 or 4 years now. It's been, So in a way, it was developed a bit too early. And this is why also the underlying financial models of it and the underlying ideas, for instance, not to share the code and so on, they're old-fashioned. They're old-fashioned venture capitalist ideas.
The financial models are really important. In any discussion you have about any of these projects, in any discussion you have about intellectual property rights issues, the bankruptcy, as you called it, of the intellectual property rights machine, immediately comes up the question, and what is the business model? I'd rather say, what is the economic model? It is extremely hard for many people, not only in the creative areas of professions, which I maybe know better, to imagine a different way of sustaining themselves. And if you then give them the example, which is encouraging.
I disagree. I completely disagree with that. I recently read a book which comes out this autumn in the Netherlands about Google in the Netherlands, and this book has a chapter about how much influence Google already has in the advertising market, and this book claims that Google through AdWords and so on already has been able to capture half of the advertising markets in the Netherlands. So this is the age of the internet economy. To say we don't know where the money is flowing, or the internet is still so small, it's meaningless. What are you talking about? Let's do real business. These are clearly people who have no clue about the changes that have happened already over the last 10 or so years. For instance, internet shopping and web shops, they're substantially growing as we speak. So the amount of money that is changing hands there is becoming substantial. So we can no longer say, well, this is so marginal. No one will ever be able to live from it. But it's exactly the kind of decentralized models that I find the most interesting.
Well, I obviously work politically, so my take on business models is only that. But A big problem with the European market right now, and also with the regulations that we have coming from Europe or implemented in the member states, is more of a competition law perspective. And competition works exceptionally badly in internet service provision. It works also exceptionally badly in advertising and in startups. It's extremely difficult to be a startup online, simply because all of the rules are made for large enterprises. And again, this is also seen in trade agreement negotiations, because the lobbyists that you have there will certainly not be diaspora for a while. Like, you might have to make billion-dollar revenues before you even get close. Whereas the recording labels or Google or Verizon will just be able to enter the US Department of Trade or Directorate General for International Trade on the European Commission, say, hi, we'd like to influence your legislation, can we? And they'd say, yeah. And this is also like that politically, this is a question now of whether or not we will have an internet that will be able to be decentralized at all. Because all the regulatory aspects of this are certainly moving towards the opposite. Also, extreme security measures when it comes to protecting society against everything that's bad online ultimately risk reducing any kind of decentralization. That's like just the way it is, and this is already being implemented now, which is also why it's a bit depressing that representative democracy has very little influence, because we're just starting to see now in representative institutions a realization of just that.
Again, I think we can also use our imagination a little bit more and think about political demands. You know, it is possible to think of a world in which we kind of dismantle those cultural and media conglomerates. It is possible, you know, it's possible to dismantle or to nationalize Google. You know, there is nothing against that, and the whole fight, for instance, over Google Books and who are the owners of all these books that Google has scanned, you know, and is making money with, there already you can see that it is possible to cut, you know, a business like that in more parts, so maybe something similar might also happen, you know, to banking and insurance after a next financial crash, you know, which I think will happen sooner rather than later. We will see, you know, a dismantling of the banking sector, and it is not unimaginable that, you know, something like that could also happen to the new media, broadcasting or internet sector.
Well, so one of the big problems is not only services online, but also the service of providing internet at all, which is what we see in, for instance, the net neutrality debate. Do we get tiered pricing? Do we get randomly blocked pages? What do we do about infrastructural investments? So Finland is just planning now to subsidize the building of infrastructure of 1 megabit lines to all Finnish citizens. I know the European Commission also wants to invest more money now in expanding the university network, like the actual infrastructure, put down fibers between universities, and that's good. But it's not just like it's not just Google as an actor online, but also like how will we at all get access to any type of infrastructure? And I think maybe if you're talking about expropriation or nationalizing companies, that should be a top priority, like, because that's something we really need to be kind of universally accessible and publicly governed, and for representative institutions to have influence over. But luckily this is also a dawning realization, at least in Northern Europe.
Yeah, it just depends on how bad things get. Google has a 96% market share in the Netherlands when it comes to search. So that is, in economic terms, that is called a full-fledged monopoly. And it's just a matter of time when people will go to court and start doing something about that. But I had a question for Maxwell, because there was a very interesting meeting not so long ago in Portland, where a lot of the initiatives that I featured here gathered, and I was just wondering. To me, it looked like a very exciting, but also a slightly odd, again, very West Coast initiative, with Google and Microsoft also being part of it. So, and Facebook, yeah. So please tell us all about, what the hell was going on there.
Yeah, it was the Federated Social Web Conference, which put on by some of the guys who make Status.net. Which you may have heard of Identica. It's sort of an open source federated Twitter clone, of which GNU Social has decided they're basing their source code off of. Really, it was kind of, I think at least the most helpful thing for diaspora was just to see the other people in the space. I think I did mention, this isn't 100% a new idea. It's sort of like a new idea which, is culminating. Bits and pieces are done now. There's sort of, the time is kind of right, and people now sort of see a common front that they need to sort of take on. I think it was a lot about just to talk about, like, hey, what are you doing? This is what we're doing. Make sure everybody sort of knows, who's who. Yeah, it was really just kind of a meet and greet, I guess. But I think a lot of good things came out of it, and I think a lot of them are. There's sort of this O status, which is very sort of a fledgling set of protocols kind of around it, which is sort of emerging. It's certainly not the only one, but it's looks good to us. Relatively straightforward and simple. Things are all things that good protocols need to be. But if nothing else, it was exciting to see that there's a bunch of people looking into business models. And I think one thing that I did want to interject on is the one thing that's really nice about this distributed model, that if you put your sort of entrepreneur hat on for a second, is that you get a lot of shots on goal with a distributed model. If the code is free, maybe diaspora tries to figure out how to have a hosted one, but anybody else could too, and they could do something that we're not doing that might work. So I think that Ning is an interesting case because sort of like they kind of picked one way and it didn't work out that well for them. And because it's not open source code, we'll never know if someone else could have figured out a better way. So there's something about, I think, to say that certainly access to the internet is sort of, I guess, I feel kind of silly because I sort of, it's not a given in the world, but if you want to assume diaspora as some sort of like helping you sort of gain personal autonomy, well, I guess you do need your internet connection. But I do think that a distributed model too, in the perfect scenario, it's more about the fact that maybe it doesn't need a business model because maybe people take it into their own hands and, are able to sort of, organize small groups of people who sort of host it together, right? And maybe it's not these single bigger buckets. Maybe we need to like think smaller because it's not really that expensive to sort of host, even your entire family.
Audience. I knew there would be questions. Please wait for microphone. The lady here to my right first, and then the gentleman over there.
Geert Lovink, Sie haben davon gesprochen, dass Sie sich als Praktiker der negativen Kritik verstehen. Das ist eine Kultur, die sehr stark auch einen ihrer Höhepunkte während der 68er erlebt hat. Und also da war immer erstmal alles total negativ und es musste alles in Frage gestellt werden. Ich habe so ein bisschen das Problem, an Ihrer Position zu sehen. Also Sie sind einerseits gegen die großindustrielle Nutzung der Möglichkeiten, der neuen Möglichkeiten des Web, was ich völlig nachvollziehen kann. Da kriegt nämlich ich Bauchweh. Aber andererseits haben Sie ja auch große Bedenken bezüglich Open Source. Ich glaube, wo soll man denn da ein positives, kreatives Potenzial entwickeln? weil wir doch auf dem Weg in ein völlig neues Gesellschaftssystem sind. Wir erschaffen uns in eine völlig neue Welt, die wir auch selbst, wie Mr. Salzberg gerade gesagt hat, das könnte eine Lösung sein, die wir ja auch selbst mitgestalten sollen. Geert Lovink, Sie haben natürlich auch Meinungsautorität. Sie sind nicht irgendjemand kleiner unten, sondern Sie haben eine Meinungsautorität, die Sie sich über Jahre aufgebaut haben. Das ist auch eine Autorität, auch eine Macht, die Sie natürlich auch nutzen, um Ihre Vorstellung von der Welt durchzusetzen. Aber wo wäre denn jetzt diese neue Kultur, die nicht mehr nur kritisch, negativ alles sieht in einer Welt, die ja erst erbaut werden muss, man ja auch erstmal sinnlich erfahren muss, um sie kritisieren zu können? Wäre Mr. Salzbergs Ansatz, dass jeder Kleine quasi eine Stimme kriegt und man sich dann relativ ebenbürtig austauscht darüber, was negativ ist und was nicht? Oder dauert das zu lange und Google ist dann schon zu weit weg?
Ja, klar, ich mache das auf Deutsch. Klar mache ich Gebrauch von meiner Position, dass ich hier sitze. Wir haben in der Tat, wir sind mit zwei Mitarbeitern in dem Institut und haben ein Gesamtbudget von 300.000 € im Jahr. Also das ist meine Macht. Vielleicht gibt es natürlich auch es ist symbolisches Kapital und so weiter, da haben Sie vielleicht recht. Und Medienpräsenz. Aber worum es geht, ist, dass in dieser Internetkultur in den 90er, aber dann auch nachher, eigentlich gar keine negative Energie, kein Raum für Reflexion da war. Und das hat mit der Kultur zu tun, die ganz anders ist als damals, als 60er Jahre. Aber ich glaube, es hat auch damit zu tun, dass wir überfordert sind. Und diese Überforderung in Echtzeit immer zu kommunizieren, ja, nimmt uns auch der Raum für Reflexion. Und gut, also das ist für mich ein ganz basaler, ein fundamentales Problem, was wir haben und was, wenn es um Internet und Internetentwicklung geht, uns allen, die aktiv diese Kultur gestalten, ein riesiges ein Problem ist, weil jetzt reden wir über Facebook, aber wir hätten eigentlich noch über Google reden müssen, ja? Aber jetzt, weil Google jetzt sozusagen angegriffen wird von Facebook und müssen wir eigentlich schon wieder weiter, ja? Aber wir haben noch gar nicht uns befasst mit allen Aspekten von diesem riesen Google-Imperium. Ja? Also dieser Druck, die wird nicht größer, aber die ist die ganze Zeit da gewesen. Und meine Passion, würde ich sagen, ist also für eine lebendige Diskussion, und da ist die Internetberichterstattung, also kann man doch sehen, ist immer, in welchem Land man auch geht, ist recht primitiv. Weil die Journalisten müssen sich immer mit dem Neuen befassen, immer mit den neuen Skandalen und so weiter. Ja? Und so entwickelt man eigentlich keinen Bezugspunkt.
We have another question over there, because we're running out of time now.
Hello, my name is Thomas Gegenhuber. I did some research in the field of open government for a think tank in Toronto this summer. So I'm wondering, you touched this issue of representative government and open source life. So my question would be, how does this notion of open government, what the Obama administration coined with the terms transparency, collaboration, participation, fit into this notion of open source life? And secondly, you talked about Facebook and diaspora. And I think if you move from one social network to the next, you have this problem of, let's take an analogy. When I move from one city to the next city, I lose all my friends. So there's a high transaction costs between social networks. So do you believe, from a government perspective, would it be a solution that governments make a regulation that between social networks you have enforced, you can move your social networks. So instead of nationalizing, make more competition to take down the monopolies.
As for open government and participation, I find what's most lacking what's most lacking now is not transparency on the government level. Governments are already quite transparent and parliaments are quite transparent. They even send video feeds from the committee deliberations in the European Parliament. What's a lot more problematic is what's going on in the World Trade Organization. They're based in Geneva. And they've had now negotiations for some 10 years. And granted, they're not really going anywhere. So they're at a standstill. But it's very difficult to find out where the deals are being made, who's talking to who and when. And you also have the arbitration panels. And arbitration panels essentially make law. Like, that's what they do. They've made hundreds of decisions since 1995, and they all affect our legislation. And nobody knows anything about this. And I think because they're at such a high level and because these processes are so complicated, you can't really expect that just opening up and making documents accessible, that's just not going to be enough. Nobody has the time to learn all of that. It's the same thing with the European Union, that they make almost everything accessible. They do at the Commission and at the Parliament, but which citizen would possibly have the time to know all of that stuff? And when it comes to making regulation about competition, we already have quite good competition regulations, like former Articles 81 and 82 from the treaty, I think, in the European Union. They already work quite well. We have tons of precedents from the European Court of Justice that say we need competitive markets, not only in social networking, but in internet service provision or in e-commerce or, like chemical industries, like what have you. But the member states are not living up to their expectations. This is a big problem. Member states not taking these laws seriously. But I think, you won't be able to, otherwise you're looking at market solutions, and I don't think that more regulation would necessarily help.
Yeah, just really quickly to touch on your sort of the social graph problem. I think this is one of these things that it should be a feature of any social network that comes after Facebook. I think kind of the Federated Social Web conference that I was sort of talking about, that is kind of one of the killer features, right? Is that if you have an account somewhere, you should be able to use it and communicate with anybody who chooses to use any other social network. There really shouldn't necessarily, you shouldn't even think of it as a walled garden that that Amelia is here and I am there. It should just be sort of you have an account and you guys can talk to each other, because that's what social networks is about, is communication between two people, not between two networks.
Thank you, Matt. Of course, this had to happen, but when we enter the realm of political questions, we run out of time because the field is so wide and complex. But in the next round, at 5, we will continue with politics with Saskia Sassen, and then, together with Trishi Ito of Creative Commons and Derek de Kerkhoff, we'll try to pull the different strings of open source life together. So please join us again at 5 in a few minutes. Thank you.